Okay, it looks like, all right, we're streaming. All right, so I'm going to give this a couple minutes. I'm going to copy over a few social media mabobs, and then we'll go. It'll be go time. So, copy, copy, copy. Need to go grab the specific link from YouTube here. I can get it. Copy video URL. There we go. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and post this in the Colo channel. Got a couple of them. And let's see. Oh, whoopsie. Okay, I've got 2 minutes. I can fix this. Something I need to do. That I feel like I need to do. All right, I've posted the link to a few places. Let me get my notes up here. I got actually 2 notes on this one. Two different notes. I've got a Google Doc from some previous stuff, most of which I've translated over into the GitHub issue. I'll go ahead and post the GitHub issue here. Let me make sure this is public, right? Yeah, okay, it's public. Alrighty. Hey everybody, how's it going? And again, while we are doing these learning sessions, we're not doing music. Change my mind. Well, I guess it doesn't matter that much because they're just drafts. But yeah, I wanna set the vibe right. Oh, there was one other thing I wanted to do, but I don't really want to do it that much. I was going to demonstrate it and then say basically don't do it. So I think we'll just skip that. And we got 45 seconds left before we get started. Get the heat on. All right. We'll get going here in just a minute. Moment. And go. Well, hello, and welcome back. So today what we're going to do is fail a node out of the cluster. That is to say, so there's different situations where this comes up. The reason this comes up for us is because last time the node that I had didn't have an NVMe drive in it, like the other one. They weren't mirrored. One had they both had 256 gigabyte SSDs. One of them had a 1 terabyte NVMe and the other one didn't. I bought the other 1 terabyte NVMe so that we can have the nodes the same. And as I've said before, in this case, we actually need to reinstall the node because I'm going to reinstall it differently so that we're going to switch where the OS is. But oftentimes it's just easier to reinstall a node, move everything off of it, reinstall it, than it is to try to finagle it. So, and then there's also cases where a node actually fails. Say that the OS drive fails or something catastrophic happens, you need to rebuild the node. So that's why we would fail a node out of the cluster. So ideally, in the best conditions, what will happen is, I believe this is the one that's we're going to reinstall. Let me go take a look at the disks real quick here. So this one has the NVMe, and yeah, so we put ZFS on a partition on the SSD because we didn't have the NVMe yet, which also makes our partition sizes different here. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall this node so that we can take full advantage of the NVMe that's there. Now, in the ideal case, what you're going to be doing is moving everything off of a node before you remove it from the cluster. You're going to stop any replication processes, because if you don't do that, then you end up with things that you have to do manually. We're, of course, going to do it the hard way, because we're going to assume that what has happened in this scenario is that we've had some sort of failure and we got to remove the device from the cluster. So I'm going to go ahead and power this down. I'm going to try to power down the right one. Unfortunately, these don't, I don't think I have something I can blink on these to identify them. But I'm going to move over here. Let's see, which one is the one I want? You can actually look at the back. Okay, this is the right one. Okay, so the one that still has HDMI is the older one. That's the one that I updated. I'm going to bring it on the table here. And I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. Actually, I'm just going to pull the power on. Boom. Okay, so there we've simulated a realistic failure. If I plug the power back in, it's going to turn back on because in the BIOS I have it set to turn on. But the first thing we want to do when failing a node is we want to let the node fully fail. So it's going to take about 2 minutes for the cluster to recognize what's gone wrong here. We're not going to be able to see that in the way that I have this up right now because I just pulled out the node that was at this IP address. So we're going to go to the other node, log in there. And now we can see that it's detected that this node is down, and it's going, there's the watchdog has 2 timeouts, one at 60 seconds, one at 120 seconds. I'll make a note to get more information about what each of those means. Going to make that note right now. And we're just going to sit around and we're going to wait for this machine to be brought back over here. Now, because we had replication set up on ZFS, when this comes back up, it's just going to be a couple minutes behind where it was before. So when you think about catastrophic failures like this, while yes, it would be nice if we had up to the second state, which is what we would get if we had a larger cluster and we could use CFFS. In the case of a catastrophic failure, whether you're a minute behind, 2 minutes behind, 1 second behind, 5 seconds behind, doesn't make that much of a difference. you're still having to deal with the node has to come back up. There's still the potential that there could be some manual resolution. In this case, I fully expect that there's not going to be any manual resolution, but we'll see. So there it goes. You can see right down here, it's moved it over. So now the cluster has voted and decided this guy's out, this guy's in. That's how we're going to proceed forward. So the first thing that I want to do is out this node. So let me go ahead and bring up our command line here. And I'm going to SSH into implex 2. And I'm calling these I'm not calling these PVE as is conventional because I don't want to get confused between my real nodes because the interfaces look the same. So I was hoping that that would just work. Let me make sure that I've got the IP address set correctly in my SSH config. Let's see. Oh, nope. IP address is set wrong. That's why. I just set up these aliases. Okay, so I'm in. And I'm going to need to run some commands to check status of things and whatnot. Okay, so we're going to do PVE cluster manager CM status. And then we see expected votes, highest votes, total votes. So there's only 2 votes right now. So in a cluster size of 3, it doesn't make a practical difference at this point. But generally speaking, when we discover that a node is down, we want to set the expected number of votes down by 1. In the case of 2, we still have a problem that if either of the remaining nodes fail, then the cluster fails. One way to get around this, which is what I don't recommend doing, but you can actually set a particular node in the cluster to have a higher number of votes. And in the case where you have a 3-node cluster, 1 fails, you probably want the node that's production to be able to vote for itself, that if it's the only thing that it sees, that it's the real deal. But hopefully whatever the maintenance window is low enough that that's not the thing that you have to be concerned about. However, you can actually set a node to have a higher number of votes for itself so that it can vote itself into the quorum. All right, now that we've set the expected number of votes to 2, we can take a look at status and we can see highest votes, expected votes, total votes. But notice quorum doesn't go down to 1. Quorum still has to be 2. So this didn't give us any advantage. It's just procedure. So now we need to do PVCM nodes, and we can see the nodes that are online. We should also be able to show the ones that are offline. I need, let's see. Okay, I'm just going to make a note on that as well, because that's something that we do want to be able to do. Typically speaking, you know what the downed node is, but it would be nice if we could see the down node here. I'm going to try one more thing. Let's try help. Nope. Let's try list. Okay. Add node, del node, expected nodes, status. Yeah, we've already checked it. Let me just check the status again to see, does it spit out the different nodes? No, it does not. Okay, so the bad news is we don't get to see the name of the down node, which would be really helpful because we want to remove it. So we need to use pvm cm del node, and then we need to give it the node name. Now I know that the name of the node was micro PVE, and so I'm just going to remove it. All right, and it says the node does not exist. This is actually okay. I need to copy this into the notes as well. So the error is not because there was an error in doing what we wanted to do, which was remove the node. The error is in that since the node's offline, it's not able to communicate with that node that it's being deleted. So there's part of the process that just wasn't done. So I'm just going to make a little note here. To do list offline nodes. And not actually an error. Okay. All right. Now, with that, if we want to reuse this node name, we need to also remove the node from the known hosts on each of the other nodes. So there is a command, ssh keygen -R, which we can use. So I'm going to say remove this by the name micro PVE. Okay, I didn't find it. That's fine. I think I had also called it microplex. I changed the name as part of one of these demos. And then we'd also want to remove it by its IP address, which in this case is 253.31. Okay, so we didn't find any of those. We also might need to check Etsy SSH known hosts. Oops. Where is known hosts here? Huh. That's not showing up there. And then Etsy priv. Let's see. We have Etsy PBE priv known hosts. Okay. So there is this one. And we're going to need to take that out of here as well. So actually, both of these are that other system. So I would need to take both of these out. And let me see what else we need to do. We'll also need to potentially edit the authorized keys file and remove that node. Otherwise, if we don't do this stuff, then we're going to we either have to choose a different host name or we need to restore the keys for that node. But let's consider a catastrophic drive failure. So we're not going to be able to restore those keys. Okay, so in this one, micro PVE is now gone. These are what remain. Okay, that's fine. And, oh, also, like I said, we need to wait until the failover actually happens before we run any of these things. One of those reasons is that this Etsy PVE nodes, which is managed by PMX CFS, Proxmox cluster file system, is going to have configuration for the down node, which may include which may include anything that was running at the time. So we can see that there's nothing here. That's fine. I want to go ahead and just move this out. I'm not sure whether or not it's going to let me do it, actually. But I'm just going to move this out to .back.d. And it looks like it let me because the node's not detected. So this way, if I needed anything from here, whoops, I didn't mean to move that to the root folder. I meant to move that to /. Okay, here we are. So if there's anything that it turns out that we need to grab from here later, we can. So with that all out of the way, and let me just check one more time. I think I may have just not seen this. We should have the SSH known hosts. Should be, no, we don't have it there. Huh. Normally that's a symlink. We've got that one. And good. We're in a good place. So again, some of this stuff we can take care of later, but because we know we're going to fail this node out, it's non-recoverable, I'm going ahead and taking care of it now. So now if I go back and look at the interface, I imagine, yes. So now it shows that there's only one node in the cluster. And of course, there's also the Quorum device. So we would have to boot this thing back up and restore it. And I want to talk about how we, hopefully you've been doing backups up to this point, although we had not covered that previously. But to do a backup of this, the easiest way is going to be to use tar. So we would basically want to boot that system in a recovery mode, possibly off the network. And I think that's actually what we'll do. We'll boot it off the network into a recovery mode, and then I'll show you what we would do in order to recover that file system. So if we need to salvage anything from it, we can. And then we're just going to reinstall it, because in many cases, like I said, that's simpler than salvaging. But there are some things, especially if you have Ceph running and there's a large number of disks on there, you might want to be able to recover those disks so that the recovery time is less. I got the yawns today. Okay, so with that, I need to go grab my Proxmox SD card. So I got one of these bad boys, and on here I have one that's dedicated to whatever the latest version of Proxmox is, so I can do this quickly without having to write another one to the SD card. I'll go ahead and plug this in to the boot on this one, and I am going to get the HDMI hooked up. Just one second, so we can go through that process. HDMI, where did you go? Yes. Close. This monitor supports square resolutions, which is going to be really useful here. So I'm going to go ahead and plug it into my rack. There we go. Plug in my keyboard and mouse to our failed node. I'm going to unplug the Ethernet from it. So our failed node, our little Optiplex micro here, has no Ethernet, no power. It's all unplugged. I'm plugging in keyboard and mouse, and then in the front, I've got our boot USB, which, by the way, never buy USB drives. Always use micro SD cards with a USB adapter because reasons. Mostly because it's better performance and most likely better longevity. There is no standard for USB drives. There is no certification that has to be passed. And so pretty much every company, including SanDisk, Samsung, and all the rest of them, just lie. Because performance metrics have no actual standard. Whereas micro SD cards, particularly because of the film and video industry, do have ratified standards. So micro SD cards are pretty much always better in quality performance along every metric than the equivalent USB stick. Okay, and then last thing, I need to get this plugged in. Let's see. Oh, oopsie-lo. Because of networking stuff, my other spare USB port is not free right now. So go ahead and get that plugged in. That's plugged in. And all right, I think we're going to be good to go. An important note is that we don't want to let this boot back up and join the cluster, because the cluster is now in an altered state. If it boots back up, things may begin to try to move back over to it. We don't want that. And we also want to delete the files on it that make it think it's part of the cluster. So that's why we're going to take it, we're going to disconnect it from the network so that we can do this next part. Now, let's see if I can get this up here. All right. Yep. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and boot this. And if I'm lucky, I'm going to hit a bunch of F12s on there. If I'm lucky, I'll actually be able to select this. Okay, there we go. That looks like that's going to work. So I have to do it in OBS in order to set the resolution, but then I actually get much better quality. Okay, video device. There we go. Okay, cool. Get much better quality out of it doing it this way. Okay, and then let's make sure that this is plugged in, which it is not. Got to plug in the HDMI here. Okay, so I probably have to Control-Alt-Delete to get that to go. And then we should be getting video from here. Oh, and it helps if we plug in the power. And the power was set to go to the previous state. When the power's plugged in, yeah, so it's booting up. Okay, so I'm hitting F12 here. All right, go into the boot. So it is not detecting. Let me swap this. Maybe I put it into. I put it in the wrong way or something. Nope. All right, I'm gonna try this again. So let me rephrase too. I don't recommend that you completely and utterly fail the node before you attempt some sort of recovery. In many cases, you can get it up in a degraded state just by using the Proxmox recovery boot. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. So I'm going into our generic storage device. That's the USB that has Proxmox on it. So that should come up here in a minute. There we go. And then we can go to advanced options, go down to rescue boot. And this also helps with some things. Unable to find boot disk automatically. Press any key to continue. What? No such device RPool. Actually not sure about that. Oh, okay. So we're not going to be able to use the rescue boot in this case. I remember now, because this one was actually installed via Debian, not via Proxmox. So we're not going to be able to use recovery boot. That's fine. If we were able to use recovery boot, I will, next time I do this, I'll use one on which we can use recovery boot. What we would go in and do is we would just delete some of those same things. So in particular, let me bring this up so you can see it. And this is all going to be linked in the notes. Whoops. Apparently this is always on top. All right. So what we would do is we would go in, we'd make sure that we stop the cluster, we stop CoroSync, we remove the CoroSync config, and we remove all of the node stuff from it on the failed node. And this would make sure that while we're debugging or whatever, and we may want to back those up rather than removing them, although that, yeah, we might want to back those up rather than removing them just in case. But that would allow us to then get the node connected back to the network, do any diagnostics that we need to do, any type of recovery we want to do, be able to do the backup. The backup, the way to do the backup, I believe, is very, very simple, which is that we would just use tar, CVF, and then either we can't create the backup file in the same file system that we're trying to mount to back up. But just for illustration purposes here, let's say that our current directory is on a different file system that we mounted, maybe a USB drive that we mounted. So we would create that backup file. If possible, use zstandard for compression, or we could use gzip if that's not installed in our recovery environment. And then we would use the option one file system. This is the particularly important one. And then we can exclude some stuff like, for example, /temp, /var cache, and then we'd be backing up whatever that file system is. So if we had booted into recovery mode, that would be the root file system. And then here's two examples of what that looks like in practice. So we mount a backup drive. We're going to put a date on it, PVX, whatever it was, all the same things, exclude temp, exclude var cache. Or if you're doing it over the network, so maybe I'm actually going to use one of the other nodes that has the storage drive attached, the network storage drive attached, I could SSH into that PV from the other node if we hadn't already deleted the SSH config. Run a similar command, except we use hyphen as the name, which just tells it to go to standard output, which means that the byte stream would go over the network rather than to a local file. So we're given a command to run remotely. It's the same as what we had before, other than that the file name is a hyphen, which is a convention, and that works. In this case, it's implemented in tar. That it's not just a convention. It's actually, it has to be implemented in programs that use the convention. So tar implements it. That hyphen is recognized as standard out. So we'd run that command without giving it a file name, and then on the system that we're running SSH, we would give it the file name. So that's what we do to back that up. And I will have a list that is all of the special files that you would want to make sure get backed up. The things that are related to Coro Sync, to Ceph, to your nodes, etc. And that's the stuff that you want to back up if you need to do some manual recover or finagling or whatever. Anyway, so let's not worry about that any further right now. We can go ahead. We can actually just reinstall this. So let me get this in position here. Oh, this doesn't snap because it's a different type of window. It's not snapping for me. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and go into, let me just hit escape to go back. So we're going to go back into the installer, and we're just going to reinstall this, and we're just going to use slightly different options this time. One, we're actually using the Proxmox installer rather than upgrading a Debian system. You probably can't read this right now. It's trying to do a DHCP request, which I suppose we could allow it to do at this time. So I'm going to plug the network back in. Oh no! Oh no! Okay, so problem here is that it is not correctly detecting the screen size. So last time I tested this, I was able to get it to where it was the correct resolution. Let me see if I can do this again. Okay, I'm just going to give this a reboot and hope that it will come up detecting the right resolution. All right, let's do abort. Oh, whoops. Wrong screen. Wrong mouse. All right. Since it's a Dell system, I'm just spamming that F12 key while this comes up. Okay. So we're going to go back again to the installer. Yeah, unfortunately, it's just not detecting the screen size. I wonder, how did I get that to work last time? Let me see if I can figure this out here. I may actually need to close out this window. I'm going to try that. I'll close this out, and I'm going to reboot it. Just OBS connected at first. And then we'll switch over that once we've got this working. Okay. There we go. And now let me see if I can use the other program. To continue from here, because this is much easier for me to read and see. All right, so graphical, yes. Okay, cool. Excellent. So that was the trick, is I had to close out this program. Then, oh no, maybe not. It may be changing resolutions on its own again. All right, device is selected. Do I have any settings here? All right, well, I just have to go with it. Last time it worked. Okay, this is not usable. There's always a problem. Oh, okay. All right, that's better. All right, I think we can work with that. All right. So, target hard drive. Where do we want to install this? I'm kind of two minds about it. I kind of want to see what happens if we do the ZFS install the whole way through. Anyway. Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. Let's see. So we'll do ZFS RAID 0, which is striped, which means that we can do it with a single disk. Not compatible with hardware, disk setup, advanced options, hard disk 1 do not use. And this one, we're going to install it this way. That should be fine. All right, was there any other options we wanted to use here? Oh, this is interesting. Because when we're using ZFS, we don't configure things like swap and all that stuff. All right, compress on, checksum on, copies, arc max size, HD size. Interesting. Okay, that all looks good. All right. So on we go. Country, United States. We're going to pick Denver here. And layout is English, sure. Password. We're going to do our good friend password 1 with capital P, an @ sign, double $, word 1. Same thing here. And then email, we're going to make that again our actual cluster email address. So in this case, I'm just going to use, I forgot what I used on the other one, but I'm going to call it lab2 at therootcompany.com. Did I spell that right? Lab2 at therootcompany.com. All right, there we go. Okay, so turns out it is better for the fully qualified domain name if you do use an internal domain name, not an external domain name, so not a .com. Whoa, I wasn't expecting beeps there. And I'm going to call this Implex1. Implex1. So we're not going to run into the same problems, or maybe I should call it micro PVE so that we run into the same problems, but I want to rename it again. So we're going to go with Implex1. All right, and then we're going to give it the same IP address as before, though, which if we didn't clear out the known hosts and everything correctly, we would then see the problems that are associated with that. So this is going to be 31. And then 253. DNS server. I think probably would have been better if we had the DHCP when I'd set this up. I think DNS server is going to be the same here. So fully qualified domain name, we are going to make that. I'm going to call this, I don't know if I want to call it .i for internal or .in for null, .e for example, but I'll just come up with something here. We'll do dot. Well, what did I call the other one? Hold on, let me go and see what this one is, because we'll just use the same. We need to use the same domain as what this one is. Oh, of course I can't do that because this is on top. So Etsy hosts .m. I don't really like that, but oh yeah, and this is another file that we would need to update. So we would need to update this to the new name, or remove the old name at least. Okay, there we go. Oh, I'd copied and pasted that one wrong before. So Etsy hosts, that's what this is going to be. I'll just keep it with .m.therootcompany.com. That's not really what I want to use, but we'll go with it. Okay, so it's already there. .m. The root company. I normally type on Dvorak, y'all, so forgive my fumbling with the QWERTY keyboard. All right, mplex1 dot the, and that's for micro optiplex, by the way, the Dell micro optiplex. .m.therootcompany.com. Everything else looks good, and normally we'd have multiple Ethernet interfaces, and what we want to do is select the one that has internet access, because otherwise it's kind of a pain in the butt. So that's why I've said before, when you set this up, it is nice to have a default VLAN that has a native VLAN that has internet access, because you do not have the option when you're doing the setup here to set up your VLANs. You have to set up your VLANs afterwards, which is one of the next things that we're going to do. We talked about VLANs in the last video, and I realized that actually the best way to do this would be with a single node. So I will add this just to remove it. I'm going to redo the whole cluster. Probably several times over the course of the series. So anyway, it's good to have an interface that we can use that doesn't have to have a VLAN in order to work. That way we can go through the install process, we can communicate with other nodes on the management network, etc. So we'll go ahead and click next here, because I think I got everything right. By the way, feel free to ask a question at any time. And then automatically reboot after successful installation? Sure. All right. Now, for this next part, we just wait for a few minutes. It shouldn't be too long because it is an SSD, but we got nothing to do. So in that time, I'll just go ahead. First of all, if you got any questions, anything you want to know, go ahead and ask. And I'm just going to review my notes here and see which things we're talking about and kind of what order. Because I write down the notes and I say, oh, I think I want to go through the material in this order. But then as we're going through it, it's like, well, actually, we do need to talk about things in a different order. So you need to decide whether you want to attempt to revive the node or not. We want to set, the first thing that we did is the right thing to do, I believe, in most cases, which is that we want to reset the number of expected votes. That's something that does not last forever. Once we modify the cluster, we add the node back, it's going to update the number of nodes again. And if the nodes on the cluster reboot, then they will update that automatically. So when we set the expected votes, that's temporary. It's for this type of situation where just in case something else happening while we're servicing the one, we don't ruin anything with the other. Why the switch to Colo sysadmin work from software stuff? It's not necessarily a switch. It kind of is. Software's in a bad place right now. There's no quality control. There's no certifications. just things are in a bad place. And a lot of people are putting a lot of faith in AI because they've run out of money and they're having to hire people. And oh, well, the reason for the switch to Colo sysadmin stuff and streams is because I want to be focusing more on this. So now that I've been managing Proxmox clusters, I want to be attracting clients that want the expertise that I can offer. Also, I'd get analysis paralysis with the programming stuff. And I'm hoping, well, I'm confident. Sorry, I was reading the screen here. I'm confident that I'm actually going to be able to put together a more cohesive course with Colo, because it's a more clear path of there's a more logical order. Like you buy boxes, you set them up. There's a more exact order for what needs to happen. Okay. So we no longer need this. Now we can log in ye old-fashioned way. It'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I don't expect it to show up in the cluster. We're gonna have to have it rejoin the cluster. Everything should work just fine. So let's just go ahead and do that and see what it looks like. But yeah, career-wise, I want to be shifting more towards the IT work. I've already been doing it. It's just the programming's not in a good place, and I don't know how to solve that from a YouTuber perspective. I don't know how to give people the information that they want. Like, people who want to learn Colo, I can both give them the information that they want and the information that they need. People who want to learn programming, it's kind of become more of a get-rich-quick scheme where there's not patience for learning how to do something. It's just I don't know. I don't really know how to describe it. I just don't like where things are right now. And it's no longer what's best for me. Oh, whoops. There we go. Okay. So now I'm in here. All right. And this will be interesting to run one of these with local ZFS. I'm just going to play around with it because I haven't used ZFS as the main system because I'm primarily using LVM for the OS and then Ceph for the cluster. But in this case of the 2-node cluster, ZFS makes a lot of sense. Anyway. Okay, we don't need the storage device. We can get rid of that. Reload. Okay. So that makes sense. Let's take a look. What do we have? What does it show here? ZFS rpool. Interesting. Health is online. And then directory. Can we create a directory? Where do we create directory? Disk. This is another one I want to understand. The create directory. I haven't used that one yet. But first, let's see, up at the data center layer. Well, I don't know if I should do any of this configuration before I join the data center, because once I join the data center, I think things are going to go back to the way that they should be. Yeah, I don't want to do anything at the data center layer when I'm not already joined into the cluster. So let me see if there's anything that I want to do before I get there. With this one, I don't think that there is. Initialize disk with GPT. Boom, done. And I would be nice if it gave me the option to partition up here, because I want to try out this directory thing. Oh, actually, you know what? You know what I'll put the directory on? I'll do it with this. So I bought this potentially as an S-Log device, but it doesn't make any sense when we're just running on NVMe and SSD in the first place, because the NVMe is faster than this is. But, you know, this is really cheap, and it can go in the slot of the Wi-Fi card. So I got one that it doesn't go in the canonical NVMe slot. It goes in the Wi-Fi card slot. I suspect it'll still work. I haven't tried it yet. Obviously, that's just for me to play around with, to have different disks to do stuff on. In a production environment using these two nodes, these two Dell Optiplex micros, we wouldn't. I wouldn't put the Wi-Fi in there, but I don't think that I've got a good use case for swapping it out with something. I mean, I guess they're cheap. You know, you get them for a couple bucks. I'd seen them as low as $4. The Intel ones are $5. This one I think was actually more expensive because it's a newer one. It's not a used one, but I don't know. Anyway, so moving right along, I think the thing that we want to do here is we do need, if we need to configure the network interfaces, it's nice to configure the network interfaces to be the same as the cluster before we join the cluster so that things are aligned. In this case, let's see, did we set up any of the VLAN stuff yet? No. We do need it to be VLAN aware. Active auto start, VLAN aware. It's got the right address and everything. So let's just turn on VLAN aware. Okay, so that's all good. Apply configuration. Yes, we'll apply the network changes. And that shouldn't make any difference to us. And then I do want to see if we... let's go to storage here. And storage may be up at the data center layer, in which case I don't want to really touch it. Well, we still have local storage even at the data center layer. So let's go to the data center layer, and we're going to go to, where was it? Sometimes I get a little confused between the two, because there are things that you do up at the data center layer that are local, but maybe this one was here. Where do we have our images? We got repositories. Repositories, we can go ahead and change that. So disable, then we can add no subscription, and then we can add Quincy no subscription. Okay, that's fine. Before we have this join the cluster, I do recommend having everything up to date so that it's the same version that the cluster is on. So in this case, we go ahead and get back here. Probably going to get an SSH error. No, I'm not getting an SSH error because my SSH config is not updated yet locally. So let's call that Implex1. Implex1. Okay, there we go. Now change that. It'll go in. All right, and this is one of the things that you're going to see when you give it the same host name or it has the same IP address as it had before. So what I'll need to do is I'm just going to do this on the other screen here. I'm going to edit my known host file. I'm going to go to line 476. Sometimes it gives you the command to run, depending on whether it's a Linux or a BSD system. And I'm just going to remove that IP address. And then let's add it. We'll SSH again. And then we need to do the password one that I set up. Got to remember to change the password right away if you don't use stupid passwords, but because I'm streaming, I'm using a stupid password. But before you get this thing gets connected to the internet, obviously don't let the password be password, please. Okay. So with that, yeah, let's just do the normal apt-get update, and then we'll do an apt-get upgrade and a PV dist upgrade. So apt-get upgrade -y. It would be really neat if you could specify a specific date for the repository, so you could make sure that the servers are the same version by date. Because I don't want to go update the other one. It's running stuff. It's working. I don't want anything to restart. But I know that it's way ahead of what's on the base ISO image. So that's why I'm updating this one to match. Okay. I'll go back to here while I'm looking at that scroll. So what I was looking for, I always forget where this one is. Maybe it's when I click on the storage itself. Let's see. Ah, yes. Okay, so if I click on the storage itself, you can see now this is where the ISO and CT templates are. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on templates and grab a few. So let's see if we can sort these. Sure, let's take Alpine. I'll download that one. I'll download an Ubuntu one as well. So let's go back. Doot, doot. We'll get ourselves a nice Ubuntu LTS. And I'm not going to start anything on here because, again, if you're joining a cluster, you basically, once you bring the thing back up, you want to join it to the cluster immediately. But just because I'm curious about some stuff, I'm going to click on create CT, password, ASDF, whoops, ASDF, nope. There we go. Unprivileged, nesting's allowed, post name, boo. We're not really going to do this. I just want to see what it looks like. So yeah, we get to select our template. We select our storage that we're pulling the template from. And then we get to select our disk. Okay, local ZFS. And then we'll see more stuff once we get into it. I really am interested in that that directory bit though. Anyway. Okay, so with that, once this gets updated, we'll just add it to the cluster so we can do real stuff. All right, so apt-get upgrade-y finished, and then we have PVE. Is it PV upgrade? These commands, man. PVE update, PVE upgrade. So we're going to do PVE update. It's basically typically an alias for apt-get update, and then PVE upgrade. Upgrade. Okay. And that we can't use -y with. However, it updates the repositories a little bit differently. So you'll notice even though we just did an apt-get upgrade, this includes apt-get upgrade, but it's also doing some other stuff, including that it's giving us a new kernel. And we'll want to reboot with that new kernel before we go join this to the cluster. So here we go, and here we go. Oh, just a heads up, you can't see what I'm working on. Oh, weird. Let me go ahead. Thanks for that. Does that fix it? Can you see it now? No, you can't. Okay, so I've been switching back and forth between things. Sorry about that. That's an artifact of the way that I have the HDMI. What do we call these things? HDMI capture. The way that I had the HDMI capture set up, I had to do a double capture for it to set the screen resolution correctly, and I left the one that we didn't actually want up on the screen. So sorry about that. Yeah. So what I had done was just apt-get update, apt-get upgrade-y, PVE update, PVE upgrade. I want to try running PVE update again because before it gave an error, and I think it's because PVE upgrade actually has to be run one time first before PVE update can run, because PVE upgrade does more stuff. Yeah, that looked like that worked just fine. Okay, so now we should be ready to join back into the cluster. So I'm going to go back up to the data center layer. If you didn't catch that, I switched between the two tabs here. So now we're back up at the data center layer for our muster data center. I'm going to go click on join information. You can see that the other node has been fully removed. I'm going to click on join information here, and I'm going to copy that information. Again, this is JSON. It is not a secret key. There are keys that get generated, but the join information is not part of that process. So then over here at the data center layer, I'm going to go up to cluster, join cluster. I'm going to paste this in, and then it's just decoding the join information. And then the peers root password, I'm going to put that in. Okay, I put that in. Peers address is this. This is the link we want to use. Yes. Join the cluster. Yes. All right, and if we look over here, we can see we may need to do a regeneration of certificates. Oh, I forgot to reboot as well on this one. We might have to regenerate certificates. We'll see what happens. That may have just been an intermediate error. Okay, so now it looks like these are both up. Status unknown. Oh, there's no volume 1 on this one. So the data center needs this to have a volume 1, and it doesn't have one yet. So we go back up to this layer. We go back to ZFS. We create ZFS. We're going to call it volume 1. And we are going to create it from... Okay, no. It's one of those things where it gets me. Let me go back up to the data center layer. At the data center layer, we have cluster set, replication. So let's see if we can remove these. I don't actually want to remove that yet, though. All right, let me go look at this one. So on this one, we have ZFS. We have this. Can we do more? No. Create ZFS. We can't create another one of these. Go back to disks. Yeah, this is something I need to get more familiar with because, as you can see, I get a little confused between which is at which layer of thing. Okay, it's not up here. I thought that it was down. Okay, Xeno, pools, replication, backup, storage. Okay, this storage. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, this storage. I need to add ZFS. Okay, so this one does not have a... There we go. So this has our pool. That's a root. That's data. Well, I think, let's see. This one can be either. Okay. All right, so we're going to go to our pool and we're going to create something called volume 1. It's going to be enabled. We're going to allow thin provisioning, 16K block size. That all looks good. All right, volume 1 is already defined. Okay, so this is something I need to learn how to do, is how do we recover a volume ZFS pool. Okay. I thought we were creating tanks, so I called it tank, but it's a pool, apparently. All right. And then all no restrictions. ID is volume 1. So this created it on both nodes at the same time. I may just have to go drop down and do this manually. I thought that there was a way that I could be up here at the storage layer. Let's see, add, remove, edit. We've got edit, we did that one. ZFS, but it won't let me add the same ID again. Okay, so this is something that looks like I'm going to have to do manually. So it's great that we run into this. So let's go ahead and do ZFS. We are going to need to create... This is something I'm going to GPT for the moment. I'm going to GPT it on Grok. All right. How to create a ZFS volume from the command line. ZFS volume named volume 1 on pool our pool from the command line. Okay. So this will be, how do I list the volumes then? How to list the volumes. ZFS list. Okay, so can I think that it's actually a great idea to restrict the volume size, by the way. Because what can happen is you don't want your OS filling up to fill up your VM data. You don't want a storage area where that you use for backups or for something else, or for your var. This is where your templates and whatnot go. You don't want any of that stuff conflicting with each other, because you could get into a state where, you know, say some logs fill up on the OS system for whatever reason. The process that is calling the logs as some issue, or there's something that's not using it properly. You installed something custom, whatever. You do not ever want that to be pushing into your production instances. So I prefer, when I can, have things on separate disks. But if you can't, and you got to set up where you need to do them the same, then at least restrict how much is being used. So here, I think it's fine to say this is going to use 100 gigs. So let's do that and then see what that looks like. Okay, used 100 gigs. Okay. And how do I limit an existing volume? Can a parent volume be smaller than a child? I need to use the terminology more correctly too, between tank, pool, dataset, volume. Okay. So let's go ahead and do this and say, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Interesting. So this wasn't meant to be part of this as the recovery restore process. I just like to try new things. But this is one of those areas where I need to dig into ZFS deeper. And I will. Oh, okay. I get it. I get it. I get it. Now I understand. Okay, so let me go check this on the other one. The volume is a block device. The data set is a directory, or more or less. Okay, so if we look over here. Okay, that's got a mount point. All right, so we can see here, this is creating volumes for tank one, but I don't see where the what I called volume was incorrect. That was a data set. Okay, so let's go back here up here and look again. So ZFS, on what pool are we creating it? All right. Okay, we would use quotas. So I can probably... Was it destroy? Okay, so ZFS list. And we use a quota. That's how we restrict it. So how do I view quotas? There we go. Just add the options to the list command. All right, so these do not have quotas. That is no bueno in my opinion. Okay, if we want it for a specific data set, we use get. All right, so that one's got our pool. All right, so let me understand better. This is type. So I'm looking at the data center layer. I'm looking at what it's calling things. Okay, got it. What I'm not understanding is if we look at Implex 2 here, so that's what I'm on, that's where volume 1 is defined. So if I go here and I go to storage, we've got tank 1 there. So where is the volume defined then? I'm misunderstanding something fundamental that I need to learn. Because up here, we can see storage, we can see this volume, we can see, okay, I'm going to ask it this then. In Proxmox, I can create a ZFS storage at the data center layer. How do I see where that's created at the node layer? All right, it's ingesting from the documentation pages. All right, note the pool field. Okay. Volume 1, pool. Okay, so are we saying that it is just, it's not even a data set, it's just a directory? Let's take a look here. Okay, there's tank 1. Huh. Hey everybody, how's it going? So I hit a little snag here and I'm trying to learn what happened. So this pool is called tank 1. It's on tank 1. Again, I misunderstood what it was setting up when I set these up. So I've got tank should have been called pool, and volume should have been called, I guess, pool also. So mount point is tank. How are both of these mounted on the mount point tank? Okay, Z pool list. Tank 1. Z pool list, this should just be R pool. Yep. All right, let's take a look here. We've got /dev/ some Z stuff that we can take a look at. Okay, zvol, zdisk, tank 1. I don't see where volume is defined. I wonder if what I've inadvertently done here, I think this might be the case. I may have inadvertently just created an alias to a pool. That might be what's happening here. There might not be any pool that's actually called volume 1. The pool might be called tank 1. And I just happened to give it that ID. So there's a difference between the logical name in Proxmox and the name on the pool itself. So if that's the case, then I think all I would need to do is update this config file. So let's see if this config file is shared. Yeah, it looks like it's going to be shared among... Oops, didn't need to do that. Because, okay, mount. All right. So I see where we've got a little bit of a problem. And I'm trying to think about what we do about it to fix it. So again, because... Well, okay, here's the simplest way we fix this problem. The simplest way we fix this problem is we go back here. I have an extra disk, so we go to ZFS. I go create ZFS with a name I'm going to give it then. Even though it's incorrect, I'm going to call it tank 1. And then I'm going to select this device, the whole device. We're going to use it as a single disk. Compression, that's all good. Okay. So I'm going to call it tank 1. I'm going to click create. It's going to create it. Now we have a tank 1 that matches over here where we have a tank 1. So tank 1 and tank 1 match up. And then the cluster goes into effect because the thing that it was built on exists. It goes ahead and it matches it up. And now it's calling it, logically, it's calling it volume 1. But that's just because that's what it's calling it at the data center layer. So the data center layer, it is referring to volume 1 as what at the node layer I have mistakenly called tank 1. Or isn't that... Have I mistakenly called it that? I could have sworn... Hold on, I'm going to log into TrueNAS real quick. Because I don't like using the wrong terminology. I like to get things right. And it's confusing sometimes because there's categories of things and there's instances of things. And sometimes the category is called something like pool and the instance is called something like tank. So let's do ZFS list here. Holy guacamole. All right, so here, yeah, it is called tank. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, then the customary name for an instance of a pool is a tank. Is that not correct? Okay, I am also going to ask this to Grok. I'm going to ask it when is it appropriate to name a ZFS entity tank rather than pool, or are they synonymous? Okay, their usage depends on convention and context rather than a technical distinction. Tank is a popular informal name used for a ZFS pool. It originated from the early documentation from the Sun Microsystems early creators, where tank was frequently used as an example pool name. It stuck around as a convention in some communities. Okay, so I was taught that it was called a tank, that a pool was called a tank. That is correct, but we should probably get with the times. Proxmox does not call it a tank, it calls it our pool, at least when it's the one that is created at the system layer. Okay, got it. I'm good now. Pools are commonly referred to as tanks like fish tanks. Got it. Got it. Okay, thanks. All right, so with that out of the way, now that we have these set up the same again, cool. So data center automatically picked up. This automatically started back up. Now we need to go look at our replication. So let's go take a look at our replication. This target no longer exists. So what we would need to do is we need to add replication to target. Let's see. We need to add replication for what? Guest. Okay. So we're going to take a guest. We're going to select a target. So currently that guest is on Implex 2. We're going to make a target Implex 1. We're going to say do it every 2 minutes, and we're going to leave it enabled. We'll do the same thing with the other one, 101. We're going to create now Implex 1. We're going to do it every 2 minutes. It's enabled. So now we should be able, if we're lucky, we can remove this. We may not be able to remove this. That was one of the things that it noted in the documentation, is that if the node comes down and you have to fail it, you may not be able to remove the replication from the interface, but we're going to try. Let's see what happens. All right, so far that doesn't look promising. All right. So we can edit it. We can disable it. Let's do that. We're going to disable the ones that for the node that failed. And then let's try to remove it. We also might need to wait for the schedule to stop, because that's another thing with these, is that it's going to try every so often. And while something's in the schedule queue, it's not going to be able to work. But we may have to, there may be, okay, let me see. How do I manually remove a replication task in the CLI from the etc or similar config in this CLI? All right, so let's just kind of cover what we did here. We had a node, we simulated a failure, I unplugged the power. We removed that node from the cluster after it had failed. We talked about how we might try to recover the node rather than failing it. And what we need to do to bring that, if we're just going to fail the node and then diagnose the problem, what we need to do to make sure that it doesn't accidentally join the cluster, removing the Colo sync config and the cluster config from it, or backing that up first, how to make the backup of it, then reinstall the node, and then ran into some configuration issues because we brought the node up in a different configuration than we originally had it in. And for the ZF replication to work, the pools have to have the same name, and then at the data center layer, in order for the replication to work, and I will do this again from scratch, but in order for it to work, it very much looks like we have to have created, let me go back here to where the ZFS was at the data center layer, or storage, back at the storage at the data center layer. So we would have to add a ZFS, and we're giving it an ID that's going to persist as its logical name across the data center, and then the pool needs to exist on all of the nodes. Or it needs to exist on all of the nodes that are going to participate in the replication. Okay. So with that all said, let's go back to replication and let's see if we can now remove this. And we cannot. All right. So there might be a manual way to remove that. It's probably dangerous. Let's go ahead and try it. So I'm going to go ahead and go here. Remember, anything in etc PVE is part of the cluster file system. So if we edit on one node, unless something goes wrong, it gets edited on the others. So here we have this. Let's go. Boop. And we should just be able to take this out. So I'm going to add this to the list of troubleshooting things that we might need to do. And the thing that caused this problem was the node goes down. At that point, replication is still pointed to the node that's going down. Or, sorry, maybe pointed there, because you're going to have nodes on both instances potentially. But your production instances are going to have a replication that's set up. After the watchdog triggers and it moves over your production instances, or I'm saying production, but whatever it is you have with automatic failover, when that automatic failover takes place, then it's going to automatically switch the replication to point from the node that was the node that it's now on to the node that it's now not on. In that process, it can get stuck because the other node isn't around to be communicated with. And so it can't be removed from the config. But as we can see here, removing it from the config manually removes it from the list. So the UI does not allow you to take that action with that type of mode of failure. Okay. Let me check my notes and see if there's anything else that we wanted to go over, anything that I needed to add. Just making some notes here about how that storage worked at the data center layer and how we have to apply things differently. Also, manually setting up quotas. I'm going to make a note on that. That's going to be the ZFS section. If you're using ZFS and you're not using multiple disks between your operating system disk and your VM disk, because you'll notice when we did the install and we were using ext4 with LVM, it asked us what size do you want each of the volumes. And that gives you a hard limit where you can't accidentally have one of those systems grow too much and impact the other. With ZFS, that's not being done automatically. I don't see any way to adjust it here. I don't see... Let's see, do we have anything in here? No. Okay. Let me see. Do we have anything here? Pools. We might be able to do this at this layer. This is one of the layers that I haven't gone through yet. The permissions layer. That was not covered in the book that I read at all. It should be covered in the training that I'm taking this week. So I want to make sure that before I go into that training, I have as many questions as I can have so that I get the most out of it that I can. Okay, so this has the disk layer. It has ZFS. We don't have any unused disks. I'm going to go ahead and pop it in unused disks so I can try the directory thing. I'm going to go ahead and shut this down and do that. Okay. Well, I don't think I've got anything else for that. I think that the errors that we encountered, the things that we went over, I kind of wish that rather than fixing the errors before they happened, I kind of wish that I had walked us through the step of, well, you did get to see what it's like when the SSH host doesn't match. So that's good. But I do kind of wish rather than saying this is what we need to do and doing it, I would have not done it so that when it came back up, you could see what the failure modes are and we could log those error messages and develop the troubleshooting section that way. But with that all out of the way, that's all I got. So adios. The next one is going to be, I really want to keep this Plex server up because it's actually configured and everything correctly. So I'm trying to think of how to do this. I may remove it from this cluster, move it back to my other cluster, move it back to that network, and then have it so that I can just destroy these at will. Or I guess I could just back this up here and then restore it onto the other cluster. That's probably what I'll do. I think I'll back this up and then restore it to the other cluster because I want to completely wipe this thing and try it with a few different configurations so that I've got the hands-on experience between the ZFS and everything. But what I was going to say is one of the next things we're going to do is we're going to do OpenSense. And the reason for that is in some cases, your instance is completely internal, but in many cases you want VMs and instances, your node, your cluster is completely internal to your private network. But in many instances, you're going to want to have it set up so that your VMs and your instances are accessible from the internet. So I'm going to set up OpenSense when the material is final. We're going to do it when we're in a one node configuration. We're going to make that decision in the one node configuration whether these instances are going to be only serving internal networks such as file servers, Plex for maybe educational material for training purposes or whatever, TrueNAS, any of those types of things. We're going to make the decision, is any of this going to be external or is it all going to be internal? And then I'm going to say, okay, this section you skip if you're only focused on internal, have a little blurb, and then say, okay, now we're going to do the OpenSense configuration. So with OpenSense, we're actually going to switch the internet connection from being connected to our first node to the internet connection being on a VLAN that goes in to OpenSense. And then OpenSense is going to be giving internet access and doing port forwarding to the instances that are in the middle, as well as assigning IPv6 addresses. So I'm going to make the assumption, I think rightly so, that you're just not going to have a bunch of IPv4s to work with. And so we're going to take it from the perspective of using Caddy as our reverse proxy and OpenSense as what we're using for that port forwarding to the reverse proxy and also using IPv6. And I'm approaching IPv6 from a management perspective, not from an internet perspective, because I just don't believe and I don't see the evidence for IPv6 winning on the internet. But I do see and believe in IPv6 winning for management, where you want to give SSH access to an instance, you want to be able to SSH into that instance, and you're going to do your firewalls and all that there. But if you're running a web server on an instance, it's going to be through the it's going to be through the reverse proxy or the load balancer. All right. So with that, I'm out. Have a good one. I hope that this was useful. If you learned something, comment below with what you learned, or if you want to learn something more, if you have a correction for me, comment with a correction. If you want to learn something more specific, let me know what it is. I am putting together this in my mind. This is going to be a book, a blog, and a YouTube series, perhaps culminating in an actual course. So I'm trying to get together some streamlined setups for Proxmox, some cookbook style stuff, and then also some refresher / in case you didn't know material as well. So I got some feedback on the VLAN thing that a lot of people that want to learn about VLANs, or at least they want to learn about Proxmox and they want to learn about colocation, therefore believe that they want to learn about VLANs without particularly knowing why, don't have the fundamentals of the IP, the TCP IP stuff. So I'm going to try to get that in there too. Okay, now I'm actually out for this, and I will probably play around with the OpenSets on my own, make my outline in my notes, and then come back around to doing the stream. I have set up OpenSense a couple of times now, but I need to do it again to get that outline because it's not something that I can do off the top of my head. So, at least not yet. Adios.